How does an assassin become president, steal over $5 billion from their own country with the support of the President of the United States, and then use that money to enrich themselves and their friends, stoking the flames of arguably the most historic uprising of the century, desecrating their reputation and family legacy, but go on to rewrite history so that his son can later become president of the same country he was chased out of? Well, you need to be Ferdinand Marcos Edralin Sr. And I'm here to show you how.
In the dark, fragile and magical shadows silently start to appear.
Viewer discretion is advised. In this video, we're going to explore how one hometown boy became a multi-billionaire while robbing his own country and imprisoning his own people, and still come out looking like the hero to some. Whether you're Filipino or not, stick with me to the end. I promise you will learn something.
They were saying that I was dead or I was dying.
Devoted to venerating the former dictator. Cult members believe him to be a god.
I have received hundreds and hundreds of telegrams from all corners of the Philippines congratulating you and incidentally me for the proclamation of martial law.
There are expenditures of $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 for one painting, I believe, an expenditure that exceeded $1.5 million.
Oh, I seriously doubt that. I haven't seen this.
Ferdinand Marcos Sr. took his first steps into politics during his father, Mariano Marcos's political campaign. His father was running for the position of assemblyman for the 2nd District of Ilocos Norte, a province of the Philippines located in the Ilocos region, occupying the northwestern section of Luzon. Mariano's opponent was one Julio Nalundasan, a mate from the same town of Bataan in Ilocos. After Ferdinand's father lost to Julio Nalundasan for the 2nd time, numerous Nalundasan supporters paraded through the district in celebration of his victory. One of the things Filipino demonstrators like to do is joyously parade an empty hearse or hoist a coffin marked with the political loser's name on it to celebrate their loss. After Mariano was defeated, a hearse with the name Mariano Marcos was driven through the streets right in front of his house.
Okay, get in.
Now, to be fair, that's mad disrespectful, but it's funny and it's not Julio's fault at all. The following day, on the night of September the 20th, 1935, with his back turned to the window, Julio Nalundasan was assassinated. The first to be accused of the crime was a businessman named Nicasio Leon, who was identified by one witness who stated that he had seen him that night with the blicky. Datapwat, since no motive could be established, Nicasio Leon would be acquitted on all charges. Almost 3 years later, on December 7th, 1938, Mariano Marcos, his brother Pio Marcos, his son Ferdinand Marcos, and his brother-in-law Quirino Lizardo were prosecuted for the crime of murder in the court of the first instance of Ilocos Norte. Ferdinand Marcos was selected as the gunman amongst the conspirators due to his superb marksmanship. You see, he was a member of the University of the Philippines rifle team, and considering he was 18, they believed that he would be charged as a minor and receive a more lenient sentence if they did get caught. Marcos, being a member of the UP rifle team, allowed him special access to the armory, and while Marcos's rifle was accounted for, his team captain's was missing when investigated. The NBI, or the National Bureau of Investigation, possessed substantial evidence that this rifle was the murder weapon. Another witness surfaced.
You damn right, Mr. Policeman! I saw the whole thing!
Calihito Aconaldo, Quirino Lizardo's bodyguard, who confessed that he accompanied Ferdinand and Lizardo around 9 p.m. on September the 20th, 1935, in Nelundason's yard, when he was ordered to stand watch while Ferdinand and Quirino carried out the hit. On January 11th, 1940, the court of the first instance of Leoig, Ilocos Norte handed down its decision. Ferdinand Marcos and Quirino Lizardo were convicted of murder and sentenced to imprisonment. Bayo and Mariano would be acquitted. Lizardo was given life in prison while Ferdinand received 10 to 17 years. His life, as he knew it, was over if he couldn't beat the case. Marcos was allowed to finish his studies and take his bar examination while in prison. When the results dropped, Marcos topped it with a record high score at the time of 92.35%. Contrary to what the Marcos estate might say, Ferdinand's score would be topped later by Justice Florence de Regaldo in 1954, who scored a 96.7% and still holds the record to this day. With his new status as a lawyer, he and his family filed an appeal to the Supreme Court. The Marcos family were talented at filing appeals. Marcos wrote his own appeal brief, a total of 830 printed pages, and like Phoenix Wright, argued his own case before the Supreme Court on the 12th of October, 1940.
Objection!
The judge, Jose P. Laurel, a native of Tenuan, Batangas, saw himself in young Marcos, both because he himself had been charged of attempted murder when he was young, and because Marcos' distinct physical characteristics, which reminded him of his own. Laurel would acquit young Marcos on all charges, effectively paving the road for Marcos to become president in the future. This event is pivotal in Philippine history as it dances delicately on the edge of monumental shifts and possibilities for the future of the country. Innumerable lives would have been changed had this gone a different way. It's trippy to think about. The sentiment of most who had access to the information at the time was that Marcos could not be freed for these crimes. The evidence simply was too potent. However, due to luck or fate, and also the Marcos family's deep political roots and influence, as well as information suppression, and Ferdinand Chua, who was a municipal court judge and a godfather who flexed his connections to the other judges. I know some of you like this shit, so we're gonna draw some associations. It is all a bit too convenient, right? Often we hear Ferdinand Marcos being described as incredibly lucky. But is it luck? You see, Ferdinand Marcos belonged not only to the UP rifle team, but to a fraternity called Upsilon Sigma Phi, the oldest Greek letter organization and fraternity in Asia. Founded in 1918, it is also the oldest student organization in continuous existence in the University of the Philippines. Membership remains exclusive to UP students and is by invitation only. Members are known as fellows or Upsilonians. So Ferdinand was an Upsilonian, and the judge handling his case, Jose P. Laurel, was an Upsilonian. Jose P. Laurel was also Ferdinand's law professor. Furthermore, Ferdinand's close friend and Jose Laurel's son, Jose B. Laurel Jr., was also an Upsilonian alongside Ferdinand. Some might think that having a frat boy preside over the murder case of one of his fellow frat boys would be a conflict of interest or serious ethics violation. Some might. There were many Sigma frat boys in the Marcos administration though, including industry magnate and ambassador Roberto Benedicto. And I'll cover him a little later, but right now we're gonna focus on this man. Longtime National Bureau of Investigation Director Jolly Bugarin. Jolly was a pivotal chess piece for Ferdinand Marcos because not only was he in charge of investigations in the Philippines, but he also became the president of Interpol in 1980. Interpol stands for International Crime Police Organization. It's basically a massive discord for police that used to be Nazis. They supposedly stay out of politics, but they will help each other solve crimes such as catching drug traffickers or tracking assassins, which is an oxymoron, right? How can you be non-political but help catch assassins? You can see where this is going. If Ferdinand does decide to have someone murked, who's going to investigate? He has the power of the National Bureau of Investigation and access to over 140 police departments around the world through fellow frat boy, Jolly Bugarin. Jolly Bugarin, also a Freemason, would later be charged by the Philippine Supreme Court in 2002 for amassing 2.1 million pesos in ill-gotten wealth over the course of his time in office during the Ferdinand administration. That wealth, now worth over 120 million Philippine pesos or $2 million US, would be regained by the Philippine government through the forfeiture of his properties in 2014. I have to mention that Upsilon Sigma Phi is the same fraternity that Ninoy Aquino belongs to, as well as many others that opposed Marcos. The fraternity, USP, put out a statement in 2018 addressing the negativity gathered around a lot of their members after some misogynistic texts from some of their new members leaked. Are all Upsilonians made up of this greedy cabal of men whose objective it is to control the resources and politics of the entire Philippines, ultimately monopolizing every industry and consolidating power into the hands of a few elites and their families? Perhaps. I mean, what is hazing if not a test to see if you'll stay quiet about atrocities, if you'll submit to the groupthink? But more likely, it's a group of people who are all in the same club who look out for each other, affording them the opportunities they wouldn't normally have access to, simply because they know the right people, enabling them to get away with things others wouldn't because they have this vast network of intelligence. It's no different from any other fraternity, police department, or Ivy League school, allowing them to play life on low-risk, high-reward mode. They look out for each other, ride or die, morals and ethics be damned.
Because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
And get this, Jose Laurel was able to argue that, this young man, he can't go to jail. He's just too bright. He has his whole life ahead of him. Now, what if President Marcos would have granted the students and the young people he locked up during martial law that same grace that he was afforded? What if? So Marcos would be given a second chance at life, and him being as charismatic and intelligent and opportunistic as he was would certainly capitalize on that.
Here is the actual bombing of the mighty USS Arizona by Jap planes.
Hours after the bombings at Pearl Harbor, December 8th, 1941, the Japanese Imperial Army simultaneously bombed many places in the Philippines, including Clark Field, an American Filipino air base.
Continuing their progress southward, troops of the 14th Corps bring up artillery to attack the Clark Field area, which is subjected to heavy shelling before tanks and infantrymen move in.
Ferdinand Marcos fought alongside the U.S. after the December 1941 Japanese invasion of the Philippines until April 1942, when he was taken prisoner following a U.S. and Philippine surrender at the Battle of Bataan.
There were over 70,000 American and Filipino servicemen who surrendered at that time. So from that point, the Japanese were sort of overwhelmed. They weren't prepared to deal with 70,000 prisoners, and they wanted to move them out as quickly as possible to a camp, Camp O'Donnell, which was about 65 miles north of the Bataan Peninsula. Within just a few months, over 1,500 American prisoners and over 10,000 Filipino prisoners died in Camp O'Donnell.
Ferdinand Marcos was assigned to the G2 intelligence unit of General Mateo Capinpin's 21st Infantry Division, meaning he was not on the front lines, but instead participated in clerical work and was a skilled spy on enemy positions and tactics. Ferdinand Marcos would claim that he held off the Japanese with a guerrilla unit he named the Ang Mga Maharlika, or Freemen, which is admittedly extremely heroic. Ferdinand Marcos would also claim that he single-handedly held off 50 Japanese soldiers in the Bataan Pass for an hour after sending the remainder of his unit back for reinforcements. With a Thompson machine gun under his arm from 50 yards away, he killed the Japanese commanding officer, sending the enemy into a frenzy of confusion, ultimately pushing them back nearly 2 kilometers down the road before help would relieve. However, this story is obviously unlikely. Beyond the insanity of holding back 50 men solo with one Tommy gun and dominating them, when the average kill count for most well-trained soldiers is roughly 5 kills over their entire military campaign, and the army you're fighting against is willing to dive bomb into you to kill you, and who hesitated to stop fighting even after the US hit them with 2 nuclear bombs, there are simply no records of this event happening. No other commanding officer can corroborate Ferdinand Marcos' story. But what do you all think? Veterans, how likely is it that a drafted soldier solos 50 men with a Tommy gun from 50 yards away and only take no damage?
Quiet lang kami as family. But when ghostwriters came out with books claiming that he was the hero of Besang Pass, medyo maalma-alma na kami, you know. Cannot be, you know, Dad is the real hero of Besang Pass. And we rightfully claim that. He cannot do that to us. And we have the proof. Merong tampo ang pamilya as far as the Marcoses were concerned. You know, para bang, why did they allow it? In fact, they did not even correct it. Kumbaga, they basked in the glory of you know, someone else's credit.
Was Marcos in Besang Pass?
He was never in Besang Pass. He was far from it. I cannot seem to accept that somebody else would claim my dad's medals.
In fact, a brief dive into the declassified documents investigating Marcos' claims that he and his guerrilla unit, the Ang Mga Maharlika, deserve recognition and reparations for their heroic feats will unearth that it was all proven false. A big lie, if you will. Additionally, closer examinations of this list will reveal that the individuals that supposedly made up this guerrilla squad were family members and friends, and each one was from Ilocos Norte. Prior to the US forces arriving, Ferdinand also tried to solicit funds to construct a landing strip in San Quintin for him and General Manuel Rojas to evacuate from, for which the commanding officer, after arriving in San Quintin, placed him under arrest for collecting money under false pretense. Rojas, who later became president of the Philippines after it gained its independence, had Ferdinand released into his custody. Boy, this man is lucky as hell. After experiencing the Death March of Bataan and being imprisoned for a short while, approximately 4 months, he was released. Note that this is a whole 2 years before most other prisoners would be freed.
Some of them take off out across the field, the guards, and shoot them. They even buried some of the Filipinos about half dead. They'd make somebody else dig a hole, beat them in the head with a shovel and burn them alive and pack of dirt on them. Hey, you're talking about a nightmare. It was a nightmare, but you built a shell around you and you lost your emotions and you was more like a robot, that somebody was commanding you to do things. The guys are nothing but skin and bones. Now, people have read about the Holocaust. They've seen films about the Holocaust, but they've never seen films of the atrocities in the Southwest Pacific. It's never been published. It's never been published.
Now I'm 23 years old now, and it's rainy season. The rain is pouring down. I weigh 75 pounds. I slept on bamboo. They had little bamboo huts, and I slept on bamboo. And when you get up in the morning, the guy next to you would be dead. The next day, the guy on the other side would be dead. I was surrounded by death all the time. I'm 23 years old. I weigh 75 pounds, and I'm washing myself off in the rain, and I'm crying. I'm saying, God, what am I doing here? Then I met five boys from my outfit. I was so glad to see them, and they were all very, very sick. So we used to sit around and argue who would be the next one to die. But they used to say to me, Vic, you look good. You look good. Evidently they were right, because every one of them died, but I survived. But you make a friend, then he died.
The Japanese government confirmed that Filipino prisoners released at the time were either those who had severe health problems or those whose families have cooperated with the Japanese military authorities. According to an intelligence report in the files of General Douglas MacArthur's command, Mariano, his father, participated in a ceremony welcoming the Japanese to Laoag, capital of the Marcos home province of Ilocos Norte, in early 1942. So basically, he threw them a welcome party in his hometown. Hiroshi Horikoshi, a war interpreter of the Japanese Propaganda Corps, accompanied punitive expeditions in North Luzon and was a crucial asset in the Japanese propaganda and pacification program. He writes in his war diaries, page 62 and 63, "Went on propaganda and pacification. This morning departed with the propaganda squad for Macashin village in the San Fernando sector, together with Marcos of the Kamishibai squad, the medical treatment squad from the medical section, and the town headman. We assembled the population of the 9 villages of the area, and in the field under the shade trees, the famous Marcos made an impassioned speech for Kamishibai, lasting 1 hour and a half. A kamishibai, or paper drama, is a picture show used to tell a story. They were very popular in Japan as a means of entertaining Japanese children. They were also used in the Pacific War for propaganda work. It's like cartoons or anime. Which brings us to March 1945. Ferdinand's father would be confronted by Filipino guerrillas for collaborating with the Japanese. In April 1945, Major Robert Lafam states, Mariano was drawn and quartered with the use of carabaos. What was left of him was then hung on a tree. Lafam states that several of the guerrillas who carried out the execution of Mariano Marcos were friends and relatives of Julio Nalundason, the man Ferdinand Marcos had been accused of killing before the war. Remember that during this time, Jose P. Laurel was also the president for the current Japanese puppet government in the Philippines.
The Philippines has entered into a pact of alliance with Japan.
The Filipino guerrillas were surely not gentle with Mariano. The execution was macabre and bloody. The man had readily confessed that he was a Japanese collaborator. His hands were tied to 2 carabaos that were then whipped and run in opposite directions. It was a slow death by literal corporal dismemberment. The body parts were then hung and displayed on the branches of a tree. The guerrilla anger at the prisoners' evils against the people must have been so unforgiving that what was ghastly became banal. The place was Sapilong, Bacnatan, La Union. The date was March 8th, 1945. Ferdinand's story was different. He stated that his father was shunned by the Filipino guerrillas and killed by the Japanese, but the very Filipino method of execution and multiple recollections from veterans of the war paint a different story entirely. This would mean that Marcos essentially sealed his father's gruesome fate not once, but twofold, which undoubtedly affected him moving forward and explains, understandably, why he would want to alter this narrative if given the chance. Filipino deaths during the Japanese occupations are estimated to be around 527,000. That's 27,000 military dead, 141,000 massacred, 22,500 forced labor deaths, and 336,500 deaths due to war-related famine. The Philippine population decreased continuously for the next 5 years due to the spread of disease and the lack of basic needs far from the Filipino lifestyle prior to the war.
Those Japs who couldn't pull back dug in and fought till they died. Many Filipinos braved frontline fire, handing out cigars or candy to show their gratitude to us. The enemy had orders from the Imperial High Command. Hold Manila or burn it. The torch was put to those parts of Manila the Japs could no longer hold.
Don't get it twisted though. Before the Japanese occupation, the American-Philippine War killed around 200,000 Filipinos, so they were getting mixed up by two superpower countries. Though the utter brutality of the Imperial Japanese Army cannot be overlooked. Sergio Osmeña, the president after the death of Jose Villarreal, would establish the Philippine People's Court in 1945 to try wartime collaborators, something Manuel Rojas adamantly argued against. Unfortunately, he would be pressured to pass an act to forgive completely Japanese collaborators, helping pave the way for Manuel Rojas, a collaborator, to become the first president of the newly independent Philippines over the Filipino nationalist and war hero Sergio Osmeña. David Bernstein, an Osmeña partisan, wrote that the whitewash has succeeded. The French executed Laval, a German collaborator during World War II, while the Filipinos elected Rojas, a Japanese collaborator during World War II, as president. He may not have needed to be executed, but he certainly had no business being president after selling out his own country, right? I mean, what do you think? How should we treat balimbings? Keep in mind that those that didn't bow to the Japanese were often executed in cruel ways. Bayonets, torture, experiments that would take Filipino women as comfort women, basically sex slaves, sometimes in front of their children or husbands, and would burn soldiers alive. It's tough to know what you would do in a time of war without being in that position.
Estelita Day is one of them. In 1944, 14-year-old Estelita was kidnapped by the Japanese soldiers while selling vegetables, eggs, and chickens at a market in Bacolod City in the central Philippines. Nearly 8 decades have passed. The traumatic ordeal the 92-year-old suffered continues to haunt her like a recurring nightmare.
Pagkatapos ang may susunod pa, ginawa ko, nilabanan ko. Nagalit sa akin, hawakan ako dito sa dalawang tenga at ubod lakas na inano sa lamesa, nawalan ako ng malay. Pagkatapos, nung mahimasmasan ako, may isang babaeng lumapit sa akin, mahusay magsalita ng Hapon. Sa ulipin, huwag mo lang gagawin yun na lumaban ka, baka mamaya ikapatayin ka pa. Kaya ako, pag ginagahasa ako ng Hapon, umiiyak na lang ako, tinatakpan ko na lang ang aking mata.
Personally, I look towards Jose Rizal, the Filipino poet and artist whose provocative pen led to the 1896 Philippine Revolution. And although having no direct part in the construction of the revolution, took his execution and accepted his role as a martyr, as he lived his life romantically, never compromising his convictions, ultimately leading to the Philippine independence. No machismo, chest beating, an eloquent, compassionate, and intelligent Filipino that loved his land and his people. A real man. That was a lot. But it's important to highlight these events, as it truly does foreshadow what will come to unfold within the following decades, and why Philippine politics looks the way that it does in 2022. You see, the public has all but forgotten these events, as those that may have recollection of the incidents must be more than 80 years old by now. And there are only about 100,000 of them left out of more than 108 million Filipinos today. In 1954, Lady Fortuna would howl as Marcos met his future wife and co-ruler, Imelda Romualdez. From San Miguel, Manila, Imelda was born into the Romualdez political dynasty, affording her privileges like early insight into the political machine. However, after her parents' separation and due to declining health and stress, her mother would pass away when she was only 9 years old. With her father's failing finances and his law practice, he would relocate from Manila to Tacloban, so that he could support his family with a simpler lifestyle. Imelda would be burdened with the humiliation of their poverty, as she was frequently among the students that would have to apologize to the academy for late payments. Take care to note how family humiliation will play a significant role in both Imelda and Ferdinand's personality and ruling style.
There are many things women can do. Sometimes it helps that you're not taken too seriously.
Imelda would be encouraged by her teacher to join the 1953 Miss Manila beauty pageant due to her vocal talent and conventional attractiveness. She became one of Manila's candidates to the greater Miss Philippines pageant. However, she would be defeated. This wouldn't matter though, because by this time, she had already caught the ever-wondering eye of Ferdinand Marcos. Imelda and Ferdinand married just in 11 days after they met, which is wild, bro. That's crazy. Ferdinand Marcos had a common law wife by the name of Carmen Ortega, whom he had 3 children with. Common law marriages in the Philippines is basically a recognized live-in partner. It's not that different from the US. When Imelda found out about her though, Imelda ordered Ortega to be thrown far away, out of her sight. And what that exactly meant, I don't know, but what happened to them, as far as I could discover, she and her children were generously taken care of. Although I couldn't find very much at all about what happened to them, so somewhere out there are Ferdinand children just chilling, I guess staying silent about being the child of a dictator. Marcos's presidential campaign implemented a message of machismo energy and military achievement to win the hearts of the Filipino people. Marcos highlighted his multiple medals, ribbons, and combat achievements as proof of his leadership competence. He released a book titled For Every Tear of Victory, which shared war stories like when he fought off 2,000 highly trained Japanese soldiers for 4 days with just 100 of his own men and himself. He was a modern-day Leonidas, fighting in the overwhelming shade of the occupying Japanese military. The book was used to curry favor mostly with foreigners, specifically the West, who would express sympathy and support for such a decorated hero of World War II. This turned out to be highly effective with the Philippine people, who were looking for a hero to lead them into a period of prosperity. Marcos tapped directly into this desire, with his grandiose stories lending him the win in the 1965 presidential election and beginning his 21-year reign. Ferdinand Marcos also commissioned a film, Maharlika, which he wrote and cast the actors, a white man to play a character that's supposed to be him, and a white woman, Dovey Beams, to play his love interest. She was portraying a supposed native Filipina, and here we thought Ferdinand is a supposed nationalist, huh? Why not get a strong Filipina woman to take the part? That doesn't make any sense, dude. So much about this man's history is just baffling.
Do you have a wife?
Huh?
Girlfriend? I think you have many girlfriends.
Well, let's just say I do all right.
Yes. I think you're what Mama used to call a lady killer.
And I think you're what they call an inquisitive woman. But I'm glad you're interested.
Interested? Don't flatter yourself. I don't care that about your girlfriends.
You know what? I don't care that about them either. But I do care about you.
In 1970, Dovey Beams would come out as Ferdinand Marcos's mistress and secret lover. She expressed that Ferdinand told her that him and Imelda hadn't had sex in over 2 years and that she was becoming richer than he was. He told her that he had plans to leave Imelda for her. However, upon finding out that Ferdinand had other lovers, Dovey began recording their relations. Dovey was open about her love for Ferdinand and stated that while she didn't agree with his plans for martial law, she expressed often, up until the day that she died, that she loved Ferdinand and always will love him. The tapes were quite hot and steamy, but also contained sensitive financial and national security information and were quickly blocked by the administration. But before that, they would be played over the loudspeakers at UP Dillman by students protesting the Marcos administration's encroaching power grabs and corruption. Look, I'm gonna read you guys some. I mean, this shit isn't gonna get monetized anyway, so it doesn't matter. All right, let me start. I want to say, I'll just say their names. Dovey Marcos. It's marked DM. I'll show it on the screen whenever I edit it. Marcos, I want to be doing something, ... Dovey, you know, I'm glad you thought of that. I'd like you to be doing something. Marcos whispers. Dovey, well listen, you know the moment you say fuck, what do you think happens? I get wet and easy? Marcos whispers. Dovey, just tell me you love me. Marcos whispers. Dovey, okay, but I know, but it's good to hear you say you love me. You know, it sort of turns me on. Tell me. Marcos, I love you and I want to fuck you. Come on, go to work. Go to work. Get go to work. 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 Dovey, now you've done your duty, right? Marcos, get to work, whispers. Dovey, get to work. Marcos, yeah. Dovey, that's work, isn't it? Love play. Dovey, that excite ya? Talk to me. Talk to me something. Marcos, I'm concentrating. I don't. Dovey, oh. Marcos, tell me something. I want to fuck you, and fuck you good. Dovey, that excites me. Marcos, unintelligible. Dovey, guess what? Love sounds for several minutes. Love sounds for several minutes. Marcos, fuck me. Dovey, I fuck you? Dude. Did you know I loved it? Marcos, how much? Fuck me, yeah. Dovey, this is like making a baby. Marcos, what? Dovey, fuck me, love sounds. Marcos, oh, I think that was like one. Dovey, let's make another one. Love sounds. Marcos, want to make another one? Okay. Love sounds. Dovey, yes. Oh yes, fuck me. Oh yes, yes. Oh darling, oh fill me up, way down deep. Deep inside, deep down inside. Climaxes. Marcos, can you feel it? What do you feel? More love sounds. Dovey, feel good? Question mark. Marcos, Dovey, darling, you know what it is. Marcos, I don't want to talk. You talk all the time? Question mark. Dovey, more love sounds. Oh darling, oh. Marcos, oh. All right, that's enough. Y'all can read the rest. That's so silly, dude. That's so silly.
And that means my pure heart.
Oh, you're in a silly mood. And tell me what you said last night.
Come closer to me.
Boy, listen to that croon. Man should have been a vocalist rather than a dictator. Obviously, Ferdinand was very fond of Dovey, promising to be with her and give her children. This, needless to say, infuriated Imelda, who doesn't take lightly to humiliation, and she would cancel the film and make sure Dovey was sent back to America. Maharlika would be completed in 1970 but wouldn't be released until the Marcos were deposed in 1986. You can find the film here on YouTube. That's on YouTube. Shout out to R.M. Brown.
If you want to check out a few of his clips, that's on YouTube.
But I will link the rest of the transcript of the sex tapes in the description. Marcos won his 1969 re-election bid in a landslide and was the first president in Philippine history to win a re-election. But at what cost? Marcos borrowed and spent a ludicrous sum of money to beat his opponent in the 1969 election. Besides straight up buying votes, he used this money to ramp up production on many infrastructure projects that exuded a false sense of overwhelming power and wealth, which gave the illusion to the common people that the country was wealthier than in reality, which emboldened the people to vote for him and which enriched the pockets of the elites that facilitated the implementation and construction of these projects. By 1970, due to borrowing and spending, the Philippines had a balance of payments deficit of $137 million. And by February, the country was confronting the worst economic crisis it had seen in decades. On February the 21st, 1970, Marcos floated the Philippine peso. It devalued in a single day by 50%.
Is this your game?
As a result of the devaluation by 1971, nearly half of the population, roughly 16 million people, were not earning enough to purchase food to sustain themselves, much less their families. It was all this that spiraled into the social political maelstrom that culminated in the declaration of martial law. March of 1970. During the phenomenon known as the First Quarter Storm, a series of protests concentrated among students and youth and workers and peasants from the countryside. These protests were first tens and then as many as 70,000 people marching in the streets. Of course, Marcos saw all these poor people and kids and said, "We need to handle these goons." On Marcos's orders, they were accosted and beaten by the police and military, fired upon, and many were killed.
I think riots are here to stay. The ills of this country are great. They stem from the economic situation, from the mismanagement of government, but from the alienation of youth. Now that is the root cause.
We have a constitution with a very flowery language that gives a great deal of promise, promise about the rights of man. And yet, in spite of all its talk of social justice, you have daily reminders. The people in the slum areas, as you drive along, people who beg for money. All around us, we have signs of precisely the fact that 95% of our people are victims of an exploitative system.
Some like to blame corrupt cops and military instead of Marcos. To them I ask, was it not Marcos who was commander-in-chief? He either is the leader and ordered and accepted this brutality, or he was unaware and was an incompetent leader. You can't have it both ways. Claiming that he was the greatest president, but also couldn't control his military and keep them from killing and torturing civilians is delusional. On September the 22nd, 1972 at 8 p.m., Juan Ponce Enrile, considered to be one of Marcos's closest and most trusted companions, was ambushed by communists on the way home while driving through the Wak Wak neighborhood.
The final trigger for martial law is a machine gun attack on one of the president's closest aides, Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile.
And then you must remember Enrile, there was this assassination attempt, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
On that day, I was with the president, and then the telephone rang. I answered the phone, and it was Defense Secretary Enrile to tell me that he had been ambushed, but that he was okay.
The news networks reported that his car was riddled with bullets, and the communists drove so quickly away no one saw where they came from or which way they went. Ferdinand was furious when he heard, "Those bastards," he exclaimed. This was the last straw. That night at midnight, he declared martial law. Juan Ponce would say later in a press conference in 1986, after the Marcoses were disposed, that he staged this ambush to help Ferdinand justify martial law. And after that, during an interview with Bong Bong in 2012, he would again change his story.
Enrile was not in his car. He was in his bodyguard's car. And so his bodyguards started riddling the car with bullets and to ambush him.
That was a put-up job. There was 36 bullet holes, and not a single person was injured, not even a scratch.
September 23rd, 1972, Marcos issued Proclamation 1081, backdating it to September the 21st. it is important that we remember the actual date. September the 23rd is the day martial law was implemented. This is the day that newspapers, train stations, international calls, television, radio, and strikes were all banned and outlawed, no matter how badly Marcos wants you to believe otherwise. Marcos used the staged ambush of Juan Ponce on the 22nd as the final justification of the implementation of martial law. The country operated under a democratic system up until the 23rd of September 1972, at the earliest the 22nd, but certainly not the 21st. In 1971, delegates met to change the 1935 Constitution of the Philippines, claiming it was written under the dominion of the country's former colonial overlords. Fair enough. The Constitutional Convention convened in June 1971. It was marred by many controversies. Two major ones included the Marcos' ban provision, which would attempt to keep Marcos or anyone in his family from trying to run for the upcoming 1973 election, or somehow circumventing the two-term presidential limit. Next was from Eduardo Quintero, a former ambassador to the United Nations and elected Constitutional Convention delegate for Leyte's 1st District. In May 1972, he exposed the bribery scheme through a 3-page sworn statement that implicated 15 people, including 12 delegates, himself, one of the delegates' wife, and Imelda Marcos. Imelda attempted to influence the delegates to vote against anti-Marcos provisions that might come up during the drafting of the Constitution. This was a true act of bravery from Quintero, as he was indebted to Marcos since Imelda's brother got him elected. The Filipino people also thought so, as drivers would brandish the words "Mabuhay Quintero" on the sides of their cars in the show of adoration for his honesty. Marcos saw the writings on the walls. The news had sent the country's press in a frenzy. Ninoy Aquino was planning to run in 1973. Progressives were closing in on him, but as we know, Marcos had a plan. And just 5 months later, in the middle of the night, he would declare martial law, throwing all of his political opponents in jail and crushing any negative press about him, including the Dovey Beams controversy and the ongoing bribery case. And with this, he had won. You might be wondering if America approved of martial law, considering how much money they were funneling into the Marcos administration. And they did. Of course they did. All you have to do is talk about how you're going to kill some communists and America's game. You know that. Richard Nixon, the 37th president of the United States, stated in a secret memo in 1971 during a discussion with Philippine Ambassador Brody that he would support Marcos implementing a non-military martial law to the hilt. I don't know what he always said, to the hilt. I'm not sure what that meant. Here we get a glimpse that behind the curtain, martial law was truly a war among elites and had little to do with making the country great again or helping people. Ferdinand's scheme to implement martial law was meticulously planned out for years before it happened. Back when he appointed himself as Secretary of Defense in 1965 and had more so to do with maintaining power and control over his political enemies and enriching himself. This is a page straight out of the Dictator cookbook. Identify a general threat, divinize yourself and your lineage, close off your population from the rest of the world, eliminate every potential opposition, kill or be killed. 60,000. 60,000 people were arrested during the first 5 years of martial law. This is a number too great to simply be political opponents or communists. These were ordinary people, peasants, farmers, working class individuals, not dangerous enemies, but starving families, poor renters, students with promising lives ahead of them, not rescued, but round up, tortured, and silenced. On a 1973 spring evening, a young lady looking forward to graduating in 2 weeks would be frightened as drunken men claiming to be searching for her brother had barged into her family home. Courageously, she would confront the men. The nightmare that would follow as a result would stoke the fires of revolution in the hearts of many and change the course of history forever. Liliosa Halao was a 23-year-old student living with her family in Quezon City. Quezon City is located on the Guadalupe Plateau in the Philippines, just north of Manila. Liliosa, a talented and compassionate young lady with a small stature and monumental personality, was loved dearly by her friends and family. She possessed a keen sense of justice and aptitude for human rights. While she herself never shouted slogans or participated in any strikes or rallies due to her frail physique and asthma, she was a skilled writer and displayed a flowering propensity for journalism. As college students often are, she was also quite rebellious and critical of authority. She was ambitious and community-focused. She loved hanging out with her friends and would do anything for them. She was the type of person you'd want to have around in a pinch. Liliosa was soon to graduate with a degree in communication arts and was a member of the College Editors Guild. Through her involvement as an associate editor of the student paper, Liliosa penned articles such as The Vietnamization of the Philippines and Democracy is Dead under Martial Law in the Philippines. What Liliosa lacked in constitution, she made up for in outward expression. When martial law was first implemented 6 months prior, she began to wear all black to mourn what she called the death of democracy. As you could tell by now, Liliosa was not one to back down from an injustice, and when she returned home from school on that evening in 1973 to find her family's home ransacked and her sister beaten up, she was justifiably upset. She asked the men what they were looking for. The men demanded that she reveal the location of her brother, who they said was a suspected communist. She, in retaliation, demanded that the drunken invaders who claimed to be from the Constabulary Anti-Narcotics Unit present a search warrant or arrest warrant or leave. Besides, if they were the narcotics unit, they had no reason to be there. She was correct, and she knew her rights. Unfortunately, though, martial law permitted authorities to do mostly whatever they wanted, and they did not take kindly to Liliosa's request. They slapped Liliosa to the ground and handcuffed her. Liliosa's family would watch in horror as she was forcefully dragged away to Camp Crame by the Lieutenant Arturo Castillo and his men. As the headquarters of the Philippine Constabulary, Camp Crame became the site of 5 of the Marcos regime's most infamous detention facilities for political prisoners. While there, her brother-in-law, who was an army officer, was able to see Liliosa. She told him that she was being tortured and assaulted. He saw the bruises and swelling all over her body. Unfortunately, he did not have the authority to do anything about them. The following day, her sister Alice Hilao Gualberto would be contacted by the medical staff at Camp Crame, but by that time, Liliosa had already passed. Her sister was horrified at the state of her body. She was nearly unrecognizable. Her face was severely swollen. Her lips bore cigarette burns. Remember, she had asthma, so simply being around cigarettes would have been uncomfortable. She had 11 injection marks in her arms and deep handcuff marks in her wrists, as if they were being pulled tight. If you've ever been in handcuffs, you know just how a few minutes is enough to be excruciating. Her torso was badly bruised with handprints, as if she was being held down or punched. Gun barrel marks pressed into her skin. She possessed a long incision up her torso to her neck, and it was evident that she was repeatedly sexually assaulted. The official police report had claimed that she had committed suicide by drinking muriatic acid. It's possible that the muriatic acid, also known as hydrogen chloride, was used in an attempt to cover up the signs of torture and abuse. With this, higher-up officials at Camp Crame considered the case closed.
To hide what they did, they poured her with muriatic acid, and then they dismembered the body, cut into half with their own hands and maybe using a bolo. Everything was taken out, including the brain. It was the most painful. I can't forgive them. So she was killed 3 times. During the interrogation, she was already dying. And then she was really dead. And then still they desecrated her body.
2 weeks later, her classmates were horrified that something so terrible could happen to such a sweet girl. The school left a vacant seat reserved for her at the graduation ceremony. Liliosa was awarded posthumous cum laude honors. Following her death, the Philippine Narcotics Constabulary gave an amount of 2,200 Philippine pesos, or around $38 to the family of Liliosa for burial expenses. The family has refused to spend the money. This is just one of the many cases of mistreatment, torture, and murder caused by the reckless implementation of martial law and continuous inaction by the Marcos regime. I will link others in the description along with any charities or political movements associated with them. Their names and stories deserve to be remembered just as much, if not more, than the Marcoses. Some of you know already, but many Filipinos today will reflect on the martial law years as the golden age of the Philippines. Is this true? I mean, it must be, considering Ferdinand Marcos' bloodline was elected to once again rule the Philippines in the form of his spawn, Bongbong Marcos, earlier this year. So, let's check the economic information from that time and revere in the golden age of the Philippines together! In 1970, economic growth for the Philippines averaged around 6%, which is pretty normal, and slid to negative 7.4% in 1984. It only dipped this low one other time during Duterte's presidency in 2020. These are just numbers. Who cares, you might say? Well, let's look at them in comparison to other Asian countries. Since the martial law era was so golden, surely it did better than the rest of the countries around them. The Philippines' GDP per capita growth rate from 1960 to 1970 was at 3.6%. Malaysia's at 1.0%, Thailand's was at 2.8%, and Singapore's at 1.3%, which looks pretty good. Then, the GDP per capita growth rate for the Philippines from 1970 to 1980 was 3.4%. Now, that's only a 0.2% drop, but what were the other countries looking like? The GDP per capita of Malaysia at that time was 5.3%, of Thailand 5.1%, of Indonesia at 5.7%, and at Singapore 7.7%. Well, just as martial law was being implemented, foreign debt jumped from $2.66 billion in 1972 to $17.3 billion in 1980 and to about $26 billion by 1984. That man Marcos knew how to borrow some cash, but wait, that's not right. It doesn't seem very golden and prosperous compared to the other Asia Pacific countries at the time. What about income inequality amongst the population? Surely that decreased. It was reported by the Asia Yearbook that in the early 1970s, 2.6% of Filipino families earned 10,000 Filipino pesos or more a year. And the overwhelming majority of 77% earned far below that at 3,000 Filipino pesos per year. 12% had incomes below 500 pesos per year.
Children of the regime. They were born under the martial law which lasted for almost 10 years. They grew up under the false ideals espoused by the new society. They were the children born in 72, barely 12 years old, and they're suffering from venereal diseases. They've become hardened criminals, addicts, or simply apathetic to change.
Ano ginagawa niya sa museo?
Akin? Mabini. Ang ginagawa ko sa cordier. Matanaw sa kano.
Filipinos by the 1980s were considered as coming from a third world country, far flung from the once second richest Asian country. The martial law era instead saw Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea, Singapore, and Vietnam in their prosperous era. The Philippines gained the title of the sick man of Asia by most Asian economists starting around the 1970s up until fairly recently, actually, in 2013, when it finally shed this title to be considered Asia's rising tiger, only to lose it again during the Duterte regime. The sick man of is a metaphor given to countries in economic crisis amongst its peers. The title was coined in 1853 by Tsar Nicholas I to refer to the Ottoman Empire as the sick man of Europe, which was in a state of decline at the time. Since then, the title has belonged to France, Spain, Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom. As president, Marcos had a yearly salary of 100,000 pesos, or roughly $4,700 US. But wait, Ferdinand and Imelda were worth more than $5 billion US. That's some wild math. How can you get so much money as the president of the Philippines while your country's debt steadily skyrockets? His friends and family were also worth millions by the time he was chased out of office in 1986.
Thrice a political detainee under the Marcos regime, Adora Faye de Vera's story dates back to her involvement in the nationalist movement in the late 60s. After serving a short stint in jail for posting anti-government posters right after the declaration of martial law, she was rearrested in 1976 while organizing a peasant community in Quezon. After her release in 1979, she was again arrested in 1984 and accused of being an NPA Amazon. Over the months of captivity, she was heavily tortured, and worse, she bore the ultimate degradation of rape as a woman detainee.
Well, from all the way, I was sexually abused. At the same time, being interrogated, parang dala na yung interrogation and sexual abuse. And then, pagdating doon sa safe house, because I was blindfolded from the very start, no, at saka handcuffed. I was tied at the back of my head.
Hilda Narciso was a school teacher before her arrest in Davao 1983. Like Adora, she survived the excruciating ordeal of torture over the months of complete isolation. Delfin Lazarte suffered severe torture in the hands of the military. He was made to endure hard physical blows in the different parts of his body and several times threatened with death. An initial survey conducted by the Samahan ng mga ex-detainee laban sa detensyon at para sa amnestia, or SELDA, revealed that 75% of the ex-political detainees came from the ranks of the basic masses, a fact that stems from the reality that it was the basic masses who bore the brunt of militarization in the countryside.
More often than not, it's the women who support their husbands and their children. They take in washing, earning about $3 a day. Women like Doray de Leon, married and the mother of 9 children.
I'm the father, I'm the mother of the house. I wash clothes, I also crochet, I also cook, like that. So all kind of job for the woman only I can. It's hard to me, but it's okay also now. Nothing can do.
But there's not always work, even for the women.
Ferdinand and Imelda were populous though, right? How much money could they have amassed for themselves? Let's look. New York City, New York, Crown Building at 735th Avenue, $93.6 million. Herald Center, 1293 Broadway Avenue, $90 million. 40 Wall Street, this is also known as the Trump Building, $71 million. 200 Madison Avenue, $50 million. The Lindenmere Estate, 16 Sedgmore Road at $20 million. Webster Hotel, West 45th Street, $1,577,000.
Oh my God.
You just name it, she has a hand in every pie.
Now let's look at the bank accounts. These are accounts that have already been seized by the Philippine government. That's why we have these totals. So in the Philippines, there's 2.5 billion pesos, assets in the form of 197 titles to properties, and 250 million pesos in cash from Jose E. Campos, 93 billion pesos in cocoa levy assets. In Japan, there's 11.5 million pesos in Imelda Marcos' Sanwa bank accounts and most of Hawaii assets under the settlement agreement in 1990. In Singapore, there's $29 million, part of Marcos' Swiss bank deposits and interest recovered in 2 West LB bank accounts in 2014. In Switzerland, there was $658 million in a Marcos Swiss bank account frozen in 1986, and which the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Philippines in 2003. In the US, 264 million pesos in a settled case against the Redwood Bank of California in 1998, $3,292,000 in the sale of the Sandra Garcia and Mark Cohen collection in 1994. The layers of secrecy surrounding the wealth was dizzying. Take the 71-story office tower in Manhattan 40 Wall Street, listed in New York records as belonging to Nyland Ltd, but tied in documents to the Marcos family. Nyland, which bought 40 Wall Street in 1982, was owned by 3 Panamanian companies, which in turn belonged to a trust account from the Chartered Bank of Hong Kong. Records of 3 companies were routinely mailed to the Unum Corp, a Netherlands Antilles firm controlled by Jose E. Campos. Campos, who made a fortune in the Philippine pharmaceutical industry with the help of decrees by Marcos, recently confided in a statement to the new Manila government that he organized 40 shell companies to hide Marcos's wealth. A shell company is basically a company that only exists on paper. It doesn't have any employees or a physical address or office, but it may have a bank account. And it's probably the way that most elites are getting away with fraud today. Now we'll talk about Benedicto. Roberto Sales Benedicto was Marcos's closest crony. They were frat brothers. Benedicto and Fergie had each other's backs. Ferdinand even allowed him to enter the private quarters in Malacanang Palace and granted him the power of attorney so that he could beat with corporations in Marcos' stead. Power of attorney is a legal contract that allows someone to make important decisions for you as long as you're still living. For example, if Marcos were to become sick and incapacitated, Benedicto would have the ability to make business decisions for him. But if Marcos were to die, the legal document will become void and what is indicated on the will come into play. So he really trusted his Sugma brother, and for good reason. The man had the Philippines clutched in his hands. At the prime of his career, Benedicto's business empire consisted of 85 corporations, 106 sugar farms, 14 haciendas, other agricultural lands, 17 radio stations, 16 television stations, 2 telecommunication networks, 7 buildings, 10 vessels, and 5 aircraft. He also owned 14 hectares of real estate in Bacolod City, 13.5 billion shares in Oriental Petroleum, and membership shares in golf and country clubs estimated at almost $500,000. Overseas, he owned a sugar mill in Venezuela, a trading company in Madrid, bank deposits, mansions, and limousines in California. Marcos's executive secretary estimated that in 1983, Benedicto's net worth was $800 million. What could one do with that much control? Just between Ferdinand Marcos, the 21-year president, Monopoly Man Benedicto, and Jolly Police Justice League, the Upsilon Sigma Phi Brotherhood had the country in a stranglehold. Imelda, when asked about this strange coincidence of all of her friends and family becoming rich, once said, "Sometimes you have smart relatives who can make it. My dear, there are always people who are just a little bit faster, more brilliant, or more aggressive." Now that's gangster as hell, I can't lie. I mean, she lied, but it's still gangster. Before I go, there's a book about the Marcos administration's finances and business ties that reference that Imelda quote. The book is called Some Are Smarter Than Others. It is an essential read for Filipinos that want to know how the Marcoses made all that money. The man who wrote it was a brilliant Filipino activist, teacher, and historian. Unfortunately, he'd get the Marcos special and mysteriously die in his home alone in 2008. The book is incredibly detailed, but it costs $198 on Amazon, which is insane. Luckily, it was recently reprinted and you can get the digital copy in the description below for only $14, or check it out on your local library, also in the description below. Well, I suppose it was the golden era for oligarchs and elites.
As for her money and her taste, by now almost everybody's heard about the opulent bedroom, decorated in the style of Marie Antoinette. Not to mention the row after row of expensive dresses and the famous shoes. Nearly 3,000 pairs of them.
I have no weakness for shoes. I wear very simple shoes, which are palm shoes. It is not one of my weaknesses.
That's what she told us the first time we saw her. She said that the 3,000 pairs of shoes now in the Palace Museum belong not just to her, but to her daughters and the maids and the nurses at the palace. So when we stopped by on our way back from Manila, we asked her if she and the maids and the nurses all wore the same size. But they're all size 8.5.
No. No.
That's what they say at the palace.
No, we have to look at that. I am positive of this. I am sure there has been a lot of tampering, just like what they did with our documents. There was a lot of tampering on our papers. For that matter, I'm only 8.5 only about a year ago. I used to be 7, size 7. So if it is all 8.5, that's a little questionable. I'm sure I don't have 3,000 pairs.
I guess I was wrong. Some of you might be asking, where was his opposition? But Marcos did have political opponents. The most significant and the biggest threat was the equally charismatic and younger, healthier Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr.
But we put a culatilla that the majority, even if it wins, must respect minority rights. Number 3, we do not believe in the exploitation of man by man. Meaning, we do not believe in unbridled capitalism, where the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer. In a developed country in America, you may have capitalism. But in a country like the Philippines, with very meager resources and a developing economy, we must harness our meager economy and maximize their benefit. And therefore, there should be centralized economic planning, and the government must actually give the direction as to prevent any overlap. Finally, I do not believe in the monopoly of basic industries. Why should one family monopolize one electric company in the Philippines? Or why should one family monopolize the ownership of one airline company in the Philippines? Or why should one company monopolize the telephone company in the Philippines? Since the government is funding all of this to begin with, these families are borrowing from government institutions and must depend on government guarantees. Then I say, let the government own them and let the people share in the profit. Christian socialism, therefore, is nothing more than democracy.
Aquino planned to run for president in 1973. His plans were thwarted in 1972, though, when President Marcos declared martial law. He was arrested on the night of September the 22nd and falsely accused of murder, conspiracy, and weapons possession just before midnight. This is the same night of the staged attack on Enrile. He spent the next 8 years in prison, first at a high security unit at Fort Bonifacio, the national headquarters of the Philippine Army, then at an even higher security prison in Fort Magsaysay. Aquino was found guilty of his charges and sentenced to death by firing squad in November 1977. But he had a heart attack on May 5th, 1980. Imelda helped Aquino by interceding with her husband at the time to allow Aquino to fly to the US for surgery. She gave him many warnings about coming back to the Philippines, suggesting that she was trying to save his life, but Aquino was a brave and determined man. Willing to die standing than live on his knees, he flew back on September the 21st, 1983.
I suppose there's a physical danger because, assassination is part of public service. My feeling is we all have to die sometime. If it's my fate to die by an assassin's bullet, so be it. But I cannot be petrified by inaction or fear of assassination and therefore stay in a corner. I have to suffer with my people. I have to lead them because of the responsibility given to me by our people. I think the very fact alone that we can land is victory enough. I have promised to return. I have returned against all odds. So that's good enough for me.
Saan tayo pumunta? Dito. Okay. Dad, yung flight ako, Brad. Sige, Brad. Thank you. Yeah, come on.
Just a minute.
I'm his brother-in-law.
Yes, you just take it.
He was assigned over 1,000 security personnel, but he was assassinated before even leaving the tarmac. With a single shot in the back of the head, another man, Rolando Galman, who would be falsely blamed as the assassin, would be shot alongside him. Now, how are 1,000 men unable to stop one assassin in an open airfield, you might ask? It was concluded by an independent commission that the act was a military conspiracy led by the Philippine Armed Forces Chief of Staff, General Fabian C. Ver. This was confirmed by a fact-finding body put up by Marcos himself in 1985. Ver and 25 other suspected participants in the plot were acquitted of their charges by 3 Marcos-appointed judges. During what has been referred to as a mock trial, Ferdinand would later state that General Ver would be replaced with Fidel Ramos. Ferdinand would not follow through on this claim, however.
Although I am convinced that misguided elements in the military had a direct hand in the assassination of Ninoy, I am not prepared to condemn all 13,000 officers and the entire military establishment for a heinous crime committed by a handful of Mr. Marcos's most loyal henchmen.
Ninoy Aquino's death was a major red flag to the rest of the world. Lenders were weary of the stability of the Marcos regime and the Philippines as a whole, meaning that Marcos could no longer keep borrowing money to artificially project success. Marcos supporters often blamed this inability to borrow money on Ninoy Aquino dying instead of the people and the government that killed him. I won't waste time explaining how disgusting this is. Marcos was desperate. His health was declining rapidly. He no longer had full control. He was losing confidence of his best friend Ronald Reagan. The media was looking for answers. The banks were weary of the Philippine stability. The Catholic Church was organizing against him, and 2 of his closest cronies were plotting a coup. There was no time to wait. He needed to confirm his position now to earn back the confidence of the United States and quiet whispers of his involvement in Ninoy Aquino's assassination.
I am ready to call a snap election.
When he announced the snap elections, he announced it at midnight, and he announced it on American television. So a lot of us are actually thinking that the elections was not made for Filipinos. It was actually a show so that the Americans would still think that he has mandate.
He called for a snap election, which would move the race up a year, forcing the opposition to pick a new candidate since Ninoy had been murdered and disrupt their organizing effort. It was a smart and tactical move, but he underestimated how disliked he actually was.
The fact is that there was a report that we are going to be arrested, all of us, and
if we are going to be arrested, we know what that means. And we have the members of the reform movement.
I am with Minister Enrile. And the reason for my being here, ladies and gentlemen, is that because the armed forces of the Philippines has ceased to be the real armed forces of the Philippines, which is supposed to be the defender of public safety and enforcer of the law.
There had been some anomalies committed during the election. And I searched my conscience and I felt that I could not serve a government that is not expressive of the sovereign will. As of now, I cannot in conscience recognize the President as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. And I am appealing to my brother members of the Cabinet to heed the will of the people expressed during the last election, because in my own region, I know that we cheated the election to the extent of 350,000 votes.
It was a brutal and chaotic race. People were beaten, ballot boxes destroyed, every type of fiery declaration was let loose from Marcos. Tatapuat, the people had spoken. Aquino prevailed through all the corruption, oppression, military strong-arming, even pushing back Marcos's attempts to call the race for himself.
At another polling place, Marcos police grabbed a ballot box and threw the contents down this drain. They then filled the box with new ballots. All new ballots were votes for Marcos. Because of that incident, observers at several polling places have tied the ballot boxes together and marched en masse with them to the central counting office in order to ensure their safety.
Marcos's 21-year reign was finally coming to an end. Democracy was back.
We are sorry, Mr. President, to butt into your program. We just wanted to show you that we are still here and that we are strong and organized and ready to neutralize any force. The Air Force is ready to mount an air attack. We request the civilians to leave the vicinity of Camp Kramer immediately, Mr. President. That's why I come here in your orders, so we can immediately strike them. We have to mobilize the helicopters that they got. We have 2 fighter planes flying now to strike at any time.
Well,
so with your order, sir,
my order is
plead that all civilians
not to
leave the area.
attack. No, you hold on. Not to attack.
Sir, we are left with no option but to
yes.
do so.
But
our negotiations and our prior dialogues have not succeeded, Mr. President.
We may have to reach the point where we will employ heavy weapons, but you utilize small weapons in hand or shoulder weapons in the meantime. My order is to disperse
the crowd. We cannot
do
all the time, Mr. President.
Without shooting them. No, hold on. You disperse the crowd without shooting them. You may use any other weapon.
He cannot cow us anymore. We are no longer afraid to die because enough is enough, Mr. President. I think you know that your time is up.
That it is confirmed Mr. Marcos has left this country. I guess it seems like we waited for this forever. And it certainly took a long time coming. And there have been so many heroes, yes. And we've said this over and over again all these days.
Euphoria was upon the people as throngs poured out into the streets leading to the palace, while those who stayed indoors toasted the dictator's downfall.
After agreeing not being kidnapped to evacuate to Hawaii instead of his desired destination of Ilocos Norte, Ferdinand Marcos and his family fled alongside around 60 cronies instead of facing the judgment of their people.
It's not true that we flee from our country. We were kidnapped.
I am glad that we were exiled and brought to the United States, because I know that there may be some may be unjust.
After doing whatever they could to delegitimize the election, they ran off to Hawaii and had the nerve to say they were kidnapped by a country that gave them asylum in paradise, a country where they had more than $2 billion invested in real estate. Hell, kidnap me, America. I'm ready. Take me! Take me! Besides the implications of kidnapping the president of a country, it's completely ridiculous that adults spread lies about this. Him and Imelda may have felt abandoned by the US after Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States, recognized Mrs. Aquino as the new president, even though he was among the last of the US officials to do so. Eventually, Reagan would begrudgingly come around after the Philippines began to unearth Marcos's immense wealth. Ferdinand was not done with his nonsense and scheming though. In 1987, he was caught planning to kidnap the president of the Philippines.
Now listen to a section of the tape in which Mr. Marcos discusses his plans to take Mrs. Aquino hostage. In this portion of the tape, Mr. Marcos also discloses that he has already made a $2 million down payment for arms with 2 other arms dealers. This portion can be found in the transcript starting in the middle of page 12.
I visited you was back right after Christmas, if you may recall, just briefly. And you said that Mrs. Aquino had an airplane always ready for her departure. Do you recall that at the time?
Yeah.
Do you think, and I don't know how to put this most delicately, do you think it is wise to have that plane available for her? Or are you planning to, do you think we can help in some manner, or to detain that, or to not let her leave the country, or what is your plan on that, or what would you like to see happen?
What I'd like to see happen is that we take her as hostage.
As hostage, in your control, right there.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's
to hurt her.
Not to hurt her.
But if necessary.
You said she does have plans to immediately get out of the country, so.
If necessary. Forcibly take her.
Forcibly take her?
Without killing her.
Yeah. Well, I admire you for that.
No, we should not hurt her. We should take her.
What?
In this same case, Ferdinand Marcos had admitted that he had made $10 to $12 million contributions to the presidential campaign of Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 1984. According to the memo written by William Scott Malone, if true, this would partly explain Ronald Reagan's unfaltering support of Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos. Again, they trusted each other. Why else would they provide asylum to a fleeing president and over 60 of his closest friends and family? Ferdinand Marcos would pass 1 year later in 1989.
Please! Jesus Christ.
After 9 months in a hospital in Honolulu of a degenerative kidney disease called lupus, he had been fighting this disease for at least the last decade, undergoing 2 separate kidney transplants. So, what now? As I've mentioned before, Bongbong Marcos, Ferdinand's son, is the newly elected president of the Philippines. Bongbong is not his father. He struggled in college and has all the charisma of a wet sinela. However, the danger is not his lies about his education or lack of charisma, but his refusal to acknowledge the economic failures and the victims of martial law, along with the revising of history and suppression of information. The Marcos family and Duterte have one of the best social media campaigns in the world. Many Filipinos believe the rampant lies pushed by this family and their cronies. This is tragic because it undermines the lives of the people that were negatively impacted by this family and their greed. It buries their truth and disrespects their memories. So you've listened to me say all this negative stuff for way too long. How can you help? How can I help? This isn't just for the Philippines. This is for every country facing elite oppression. for money, from people who use their influence to silence the poor and the weak. I do not blame people for wanting to see the good in their politicians and their representatives, but try and shift your love and affection away from those that seek to take your money, your labor, and pretend to care about you. Grant that loving grace to your brothers and your sisters who are suffering and working hard to try and make it as you are. Grant it to the ones that have fallen, to the voiceless, many who are at risk of being erased from history.
The gunmen came from nowhere and started shooting at us. When I fell, I thought, what sort of life do we live?
We've been corralled. For 5 years, we pleaded to Duterte's administration to help us. No one is here to protect us. People here don't see us as a human beings. To them, we are garbage.
Ilujud niya ka ng alamaran, naglapag siya sa mga katungod sa mga babae. Kaya ang babae namo dito, babae namo dito nga, bayaran ng 100, kaya gamit doon ang pagkababae.
Nag-anak nga, dahil pwede na ka na ko, pwede na ka makuan ka ng may lagtan. Anak ko, ha? Niya anak ko nga, dili ko sir, uy, mahadlok ko. Niya nagdagan na dahil ko, pag-abot na ako dito sa balay, nagkuan na ako dito na ako sa aming balay. Anak ko nga, magi, pangayuan na unta ko, turipo na unta ko, niya nag-adto dahil ang mga militar nagsundo sa ako, nag-adto na sa aming balay. Anak siya, nganong naadlok man ka sa amo ganina. Anak ko nga, alangan kay, imo man kong pangayuan o kanang ripon man unta ko nimo anak ko. Anak siya nga, wala man ko naging anak sa imo. Anak ko nganong, anak ko giingnan ko nimo ganina o wala man unta ko naadlok sa inyo kaayo. Kung wala ko nimo pangayuan, anak ko.
Kani ma'am, ang unsa man ang inyong mga babae, okay ba nga makagunit mi ang mga sundalo sa inyong abaga? Bastos yun ang sundalo.
Wala talaga.
Di ako giingnan ma'am. Ako giingnan ma'am nga, kami sir, isa ka judger, tumbas ang kinabuhi. Mal ang bilat sa mga babae.
These issues are still rampant in the Philippines. Child exploitation, substance abuse, reimbursement for martial law prisoners, reimbursement for Japanese comfort women, acknowledgement and apologies for Japanese prime ministers, transparency from the organizations, financial transparency from politicians, cap on how much you can earn in government, poor education. These things are running rampant all over the world, not just in the Philippines, but justice must prevail. The Philippine people must not let these crimes go unpunished. Everyone must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No more forgiving those that would just cast judgment on the poor so swiftly. Politicians are quick to execute poor people or journalists for non-violent crimes because they know that nothing will happen to them. Politicians must not be allowed to play judge, jury, and executioner. This must end. People that use drugs, poor people, broken families, victims of war and poverty, and indigenous people, these are not people that deserve violence or deserve to be locked up. They should be shown fairness, care, and compassion. People do not do drugs because they are evil. They do drugs because they are in pain, are lonely, or are lost. Some as a direct result of the poverty facilitated by oppressive regimes and elites. There's hope for a more beautiful Philippines, for a more beautiful world. You have more in common with the poor than you do these rich assholes who flash their money and wealth and present it as success, present it as being better, and expect you to work hard while they live lavishly off your labor. That's your money. It's your country, the working people. Those are your people who sing and dance and laugh as you do with your friends and family, with each other. Use your loud, beautiful singing or yelling voice and take it all back. Let the moon beam over me, soft and serene. Let the dawn shed over me its radiant flashes. Let the wind with sad lament over me keen. And if on my cross a bird should be seen, let it trill there its hymn of peace to my ashes. Let the sun draw the vapors up to the sky, and heavenward in purity bear my tardy protest. Let some kind soul o'er my untimely fate sigh, and in the still evening a prayer be lifted on high from thee, O my country, that in God I may rest. Jose Rizal, Salamat, and much love.
Perception is real, and the truth is not.
It's a shame they're so stupid. I wish I didn't feel this way, but they are. They're so stupid. Their simple minds are all the same, 'cause they really love to say the things that stupid people say. So stupid. I really wish it wasn't true, but they are. They're so stupid. I just don't think they have a clue, 'cause they really love to do the things that stupid people do. Yeah, they really love to do the things that stupid people do. They're so stupid.
This is hard. I don't like this. This is my least favorite part. But thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, comment. If you hated it, comment. I want all the smoke. I'll let you know. I will respond to every single comment down below. If you are interested in following me more, I have a Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I will link those over here. I appreciate you watching my little video. I wanted it to be very edited. I wanted it to be edited very well, but my computer just kept crashed about 50 to 60 times. So I appreciate you sticking with it regardless. I'm just gonna have to stick to like commentary until I can afford better equipment. Right now, I'm a broke boy, so I am not going to be making anything too crazy, but I am going to focus on true crime and corruption. If you're interested in my script, I'll leave that down below as well. Everything is annotated. If you want to know the sources where I got the information, you could just use that. Also, if you just want to make another video based off of my script, you can do that as well. I don't mind. If you got a better voice, you have better editing skills, or you can film it better. I think that it's just important that the information get out there and stay on the internet. And the more times it gets reposted or posted, the more it gets shared, and the least likely it'll be forgotten in history. If you're interested in more music from the band that played during the credits, I will link them. Oh God. Oh God. If you're interested in more, that's so stupid. If you're interested in more music from the band that played in the credits, that is my brother's fiance's family band, and they're incredible. They're from West Virginia. So please give them a listen, support a band from the Appalachia. Yeah. They're called Bicycle or Bicycle. I don't know why I keep on saying Bicycle. They're called Bicycle. So yeah. Check them out as well. I appreciate all of the YouTube videos that I was able to take little clips from. I'll put all those in the description below. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't really have much else to say. Let me get my boy out here. So me and my boy, he's been my audience. He's kind of like, he's helped me with the focus. He's helped me with keeping me, looking at the camera. So I just want y'all to appreciate him. It's all about him. So thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Again, like, subscribe, comment. If you hate it, let me know. What the hell? Yeah, that's pretty good. Shit. I'm Devonte, Devil Moon on the internet. You can find me at most places. On Instagram, my Instagram is Light of Lucifer. You can find that as well in the description below. So I'll be posting little clips there. That one is about taking knowledge from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, it's a little corny, but hey, what can you do? I appreciate you so much. Have a blessed day and take care.